Good evening, everyone. I'm Janet Webster Jones. I'm the owner and founder of Source Booksellers in Midtown Detroit. On this lovely winter evening when it's about 40 degrees, which is unbelievable. And so thank you all for joining us this evening in another one of our exciting virtual author talks. And this evening, we have our author with us, who is Randall Maurice Jelks. I have lots to say about him, but I'm going to first just tell you a little bit about uh, who he is and what he does. Maurice Jelks is a professor and documentary producer and the author of African Americans in the Future in the Furniture City, and the book Benjamin Elijah Mays, Schoolmaster of the Movement. Jelks has most recently written Faith and Struggle in the Lives of Four African Americans: Ethel Waters, Mary Lou Williams, Eldridge Cleaver, and Muhammad Ali. I love the things that he writes. And he's currently a professor teaching at the University of Kansas. Now, I have to say that Dr. Jelks is more than just a guest author to Source Booksellers. He's also a friend, a family friend, and we have all kinds of connections along the way. So we'll speak on that in just a bit. So welcome, Dr. Jelks. We're so happy to have you here. Now, along with him this evening is his conversationalist, Darcy E. McConnell. She's the president and CEO of McConnell Communications LLC right here in Detroit. Has 18 years of experience and is experience in the areas of communications strategies, crisis management, marketing, and political consulting. To me, that's a lot to do, and she has been doing that for the last 18 years. McConnell also has experience as a reporter for newspaper outlets and is past president of the Detroit chapter of the National Association of Black Journalists. So let me say a little word about so many of our connections with these guests this evening. As Source Booksellers, we were delighted to be able to provide books for the National Association of Black Journalists when they were in Detroit several years ago. And so when I saw those initials, I didn't even have to think about what they were. I know it's National Association for Black Journalists. And it was at that event, even though we were providing books for the speakers there, we got to meet so many people, and I was so very, very impressed with the breadth and scope of the organization and the work that they do across the country. So we're delighted to have Darcy McConnell here with us this evening as a conversationalist with Professor Jelks. Now, back to Dr. Jelks. We have lots of connections. First of all, Source Booksellers is a Spelman-oriented store, because there are 4 generations of us who have gone to Spelman College. And of course, Spelman is right across the street from Morehouse College, of which my father was a graduate of Morehouse College many, many years ago. We're connected also in terms of Martin Luther King. And while I did not go to the March on Washington event, which I deeply regret, we always knew of Martin Luther King Jr. because his mother and my mother were friends at Spelman many years ago. And I think she even met MLK Jr. when he was just a tiny, tiny baby, newborn baby. So our mothers were connected. And then my daughter, Hillary, who is also a history professor, and Dr. Jelks knew each other at Michigan State University. So there's that connection. And I see in the book, he's made a lovely tribute to Dr. Darlene Clark Hines. So I know that that is another lovely connection for this evening. And so between Morehouse and Michigan State University, history and the time that has passed, and Source Booksellers, we feel that this is a family affair this evening. So right now I want to turn it right over to Darcy McConnell, and she and Dr. Randall Jelks will have a lively conversation. We'll come along behind there and take some questions through my daughter Allison is going to be working that, and we'll all just peek in and join the family circle, or as they say, the circle of life. So, Darcy? Randall, it's all yours.
Good evening, and thank you for hosting and for having me, and also for the love to the Black Journalists Association. They were such an instrumental part of my life. I still have some connection to them and affinity for them, so I'm glad to hear about that. Dr. Jelks, welcome. Uh,
Thank you.
should I talk about our connection first?
Oh, sure, you can.
So I actually met Dr. Jelks when I was a reporter at the Grand Rapids Press covering higher education. And I believe he was the lone African-American professor there, if I'm not mistaken. So,
Uh, there
so
were two of us.
oh, okay, sorry. So anyway, thank you so much for being here. Um, I don't know if you want to say anything or should I just get into my questions?
We should begin.
Okay, great. So first of all, why did you write this book?
So I wrote this book out of need. I was asked to come to Elmhurst University in just outside of Chicago, the city of Elmhurst, and give a Martin Luther King Day talk. And I was trying to figure out how to connect with young people. Particularly, I was wanting to connect with them because it was several days after the inauguration of President Trump. And I had a sense that the students that Elmhurst attracts, the students who are engaged in the wider world, would be rather despondent. And I wanted to figure out how to provide them some hope, how to provide them some insight into democratic struggle.
So the book is Letters to Martin, and I think we were going to have you read a few passages from
Sure.
it before we got into additional questions. So I think I got ahead of myself. So if you could go ahead and share some passages from the book, and then we can come back and talk a little more.
So I'll begin with the chapter called Network of Mutuality. And I began, Martin, I read some of your closest peers called you Martin, and others called you Mike. I thought of you as Martin after seeing your photograph in John Williams' book, The King That God Didn't Save, when I was 13. There was only you and Andrew Young in the Birmingham airport around 4 a.m. You were slumped over with a cigarette in your hand, exhausted. You were weary like the men who labored in my childhood neighborhood of New Orleans, drooped over after a week's worth of physical toil from jobs that paid too little money. They were like you, trying to preserve enough energy to enjoy family and friends. They too slumped over in bar rooms and on their front porches with a cigarette and a beer, fatigued. That photograph reminded me of Southern Black and white men known only by their initials, not their full names. To me, you were not Mike, your former birth name and nickname. The name bore a childhood familiarity I dare not broach. In my eyes, you were Martin in the same way they were EJs and ABs throughout the South. As 13 years of age, that photograph offered me a lesson in your humanity. You were not the icon of Ebony magazine. You were an exhausted worker. The photograph was not the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. It was Martin, the overworked laborer. The toll of your labor had taken it out of you. As exhausted as you appeared to be in that photograph, there was still something beautiful about it. You were James Brown short. You looked like the dark-skinned men in my communities whom I saw at the barber shop, in church, and on street corners. You held the same Black handsomeness that US society so fears. This is something men in our community loved about you secretly, even if they disagreed with you on questions of self-defense. You were dark as they were, short with a wide Black African nose, and you had hair that you brushed to smooth out the naps.
Great. I love that opening and the photo, and I appreciate, you know, sort of maybe taking it down a few notches, right?
Yeah.
Humanizing him. But that's a good segue for, well, one thing that you talked about in the book is being inspired by him and emulating him in sort of your life, right? what was it beyond maybe this humanity in this picture? Because you talked about, personally meeting his attorney at such a young age that made you want to be like King.
Well, I don't know if I wanted to be like King, because I didn't certainly want to be assassinated or have
Yeah.
people call me names all the time, but was the first Black man I saw with a PhD. And, I grew up till I was 14 in the South. And so that was the first person. And I wanted to know why a person would want to have a PhD and be a egghead or intellectual. And so those were the things about King. And I also wanted to know, because I moved from New Orleans to Chicago, what was the movement like there? And I was just a curious kid, a kind of kid secretly going off to the library and reading books. And I just wanted to know about the politics of it all and what it took to lead a movement. I think in my generation, I always felt everybody wanted to be heroic of a sort. And I too wanted to be heroic. And he came from a church background, so did I. And so that was just a easy connection. And I was a short kid and he was a short man. So I identified with him.
Gotcha. And so on that note, are these letters love letters or are they a diss? And let me elaborate on that, because in some ways you talk about maybe him being romanticized too much. Here, you sort of, I guess, took him down a notch off a pedestal with the human reference. You also mentioned that maybe he didn't do as good a job in terms of keeping a seat at the table for women. So how would you characterize your letters about Martin?
Yeah, well, letters, people don't write letters anymore, and and letters are intimate, right? I mean, letters between people are intimate, and I wanted to write something intimate because to humanize him, to get close to someone is to share ideas in the most personal of thoughts. And so I thought that the model of letters was really good, because the young people that and old folk that I aimed for needed to hear this in a language that was much more intimate, not strident, not punching you in the nose, but warm and questioning, all within as my friend Cornel West would say, all with love,
So in letter 3, you talk about, a lot, obviously democracy is the focal point throughout the book, but you talk about being called to a higher ideal over an extended period of time. And so what does that look like in practical work?
Well, yeah, I mean, so King, so his PhD was in systematic theology, and he was reflecting about these things in thinking about the great ideals that Asperge. He wrote his dissertation on the notions about God, and he's like, well, what does God mean for us? Does God mean that we are living in an impersonal world? And he very much wanted to personalize the world. And those high ideals was what drove him. My grandparents used to say, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And I wanted to get at in that chapter that he was pushing for us a better humanity, a better self, a better person, and as which anybody who thinks about philosophy or theology should do.
And in letter 3, there's a clear bit of, anti-violence, anti-gun to some extent, but the overarching thing is a revolution of values, right? And so how do you fight that, particularly in this climate, right?
Well, I mean, we're in a fight about values, right? And that's why I wrote the chapter. We really are in a fight about values. The values of whether A small minority of people will run our country over against a vast majority. That's a values issue. We are in a fight about whether that whether we can say anything we want to people disrespectfully or so. That's a real values fight. And politically, a values fight is going on. Who will share the wealth in the country? And globally around the world, we're in a values fight about should we have non-transparent government? Should we have people who are dictators? So those are all values, a revolution in values, and that came out of King really worried about at the end of the coming of the Vietnam War that we were making our society far more corrosive in its values. And so that revolution of values is that we have to change our values. Now, the danger of that is that that kind of language plays into slick politicians who say we are all about values,
Right.
and they're all about only the values of a certain group of people.
Absolutely. Well, just to build on that, because I think it's letter 6, it talks about the strength of love. Okay, so of course we had in that time frame, we had the tug of war, Malcolm's message versus King's message. And then you said that we are in a viral pandemic of vainglorious gloriousness. So how can we afford to, use love to fight with, right? We're also in a climate of great fear mongering. So how can we succeed with the strength of love in this climate?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's easy to mobilize, as we've seen over and over and around the world. It's easily to mobilize hatred and fear. That's the easiest thing in the world to do because that's natural. I mean, we fear something. It's easy to get people all worked up about their fears. What's hard to do is get them to go beyond their fears and see even quote unquote the enemy as human. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were both talking about love. Malcolm was talking about love of Black communities need to love themselves. King would eventually come around to that. Black communities do need to love themselves. And 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 King was talking about love as a political force and making a movement that was nationally bringing in people, allies across the board. But both of them were talking about love and extent. Malcolm was absolutely right. If you don't love yourself, you do destructive things to your communities. And I always think that nonviolence, not just for protest, but nonviolence ought to be a stand that we should be teaching young people in Black communities because we're doing so much destructive violence out of self-hatred, as Malcolm identified, but nonviolence to one another.
So what do you want people to take away from this book, and what do you think is most instructive for today?
Well, there are several things I want them to take away. First of all, that a pride, many that Black people were truly democratic. I mean, I often reflect about the Montgomery bus boycott, and the Montgomery bus boycott was a democratic movement. That is, they elected Martin Luther King to be their spokesperson, and the vice president, and the treasurer, and all of those other things that come with it. And they reported back to the people of Montgomery for that year-long protest that what they were doing and were transparent, and people could disagree with them and call for a change of action. These were the kinds of things, and that's a really beautiful thing. Internally, out of Black life was a sense of democracy, and that's really important for us to get over. Because, Darcy, I've had the privilege of teaching in Ghana. I have the privilege of teaching in Germany and in the Czech Republic. And in the 2 European countries, people come to me all the time when I'm teaching and want to take classes. I had an overpopulated class in the Czech Republic because they wanted to find out, how did Black people keep up this struggle? And that's a major power that we have, and that we don't acknowledge. We sort of like, oh, they're trying to do this to us. But we're in the driver's seat in many ways globally. Back in 1989, I never forget this, when the young people were protesting against the Chinese government in Beijing. A young man had on a sash that said, "We shall overcome." I'm sure he didn't speak English, but he understood what that meant. And so this is a global power to engage the world. People come to the United States not for its military might, not for all just economics, but for the opportunity to be able to say what they want, or as Dr. King said, the right to protest. And I think that's a power. And we sometimes short sell ourselves about the power we have in our hands. And that's the spiritual part of this book. The spiritual part is that came out of our either emotional commitment, one does not have to believe in the divine, or our deep sense of a divinity, that we have a spiritual power of democracy. And that's what is trying to be taken away and stolen from us, if I use that language. And I wanted, out of King's life, as a child, King as a child of Black church institutions, for us to see that. And we have a long way to go. You know, King was flawed. He was a man of his generation. But we don't see people as ends. We are Black, gay, straight, trans, and everything in between. And all of us have the right to exist, and all of us have the right to say how we are governed.
And so is it fair to say that this is a call to action, or is it more just to?
It's a call to reflect about our actions, because sometimes, we take action without reflection. And you've been in politics long enough to know that sometimes people just jump out like, wait, whoa, back up. What are the sources? I wanted people to reflect. I mean, I say this from the very outset. Sometimes we need to take a step back and reflect and think about what we are trying to accomplish and what we're trying to do. Else we simply repeat what's already been going on, and at our own expense. So we need to reflect about what we're doing.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and of course, it's always a call to action. I mean, we have voting rights right up before us, and I want to say, look, people forget the first speech King gave before the Lincoln Memorial was not "I have a dream." It was "Give us the ballot." It was about voting in 1957. Right. And so that is understandable. If we don't have the ballot, then we don't have the right to control our existence.
Gotcha. Well, so, and yeah, you talked about, growing up King, how some folks had maybe a different agenda, or were, more comfortable with maybe class or growth in other ways, right? Rather than the activism. But you also consistently sort of underscore that the urgency of now, right? And right. So that's why
I was citing my own generation. We got too much worried about materialistic things and not making a commitment to making sure we all live.
Gotcha. And so I'm just going to read what you have at the end here to speak to that. And then I think we're going to take questions from folks. We are now faced with the fact, my friends, that tomorrow is today. Over the bleached bones and jumbled residues of numerous civilizations are written the pathetic words, "Too late." There's an invisible book of life that faithfully records our vigilance or our neglect. Omar, and I'm going to mangle his name. Omar is right. The moving figure writes, and having writ moves on. So, I want to make sure if there's something else you want to add before we open up for questions, Dr.
Oh,
Jones.
I think that, we are facing climate change and we are facing any number of issues, but we can only face those if we have a sense of hope, and that we need to rebuild institutions that give our communities a sense of hope so that we can continue to struggle on.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I think Source is going to help us, but if you have questions now for Dr. Jelks, now's the time. So we would love to see what he can answer beyond what I asked about. So thanks again for joining us.
So your questions can be put in the Q&A or in the chat. I just wanted to mention what I don't know if there's like a playlist that goes with this book, but
Oh, yeah.
when you read through it, you're like,
Yes.
the hell yeah, Gil
Yes.
Scott-Heron,
Yes.
Robert Johnson.
Staples.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a playlist playing in my head.
Okay.
Well, just to follow up on that, why did you think it was important to incorporate music and poetry and all those other elements in these letters?
Yeah, well, those were the soundtracks of the time, and I wanted to capture the part of the soundtrack from the diverse soundtracks that was going on, and diverse soundtracks for the way we should think about this period and our own period, from hip hop to jazz to blues to hymns. Black people, if we forget, Black people used to sing hymns as well. It's not just that we sang gospel music, we sang hymns and all that, and so I wanted all of those things to be incorporated into. I really stole this from W.E.B. Du Bois, Souls of Black Folks. In Souls of Black Folks, he always began with some kind of hymnody. But Du Bois was too classist for my taste, so I wanted to make sure to have all kinds of music in this.
Great. Great. Do we have any questions? I hope we do. For those who are watching, we'd love to have you ask some questions of Dr. Jelks.
I just wanted to say, go ahead. I just want to say to Dr. Jelks and to Darcy McConnell, thank you so much for these words. I think that our understanding of King, I would like to think, continues to grow and improve over time. And that you spoke of Cornel West saying, with love. I always think about Michael Jackson saying to his musicians when he was helping them to play it the way he wanted it to be played, he said, not criticism, with love, with love. Love is the hardest thing to do. And I think that doing things in love takes a person's requirement to be vulnerable as well as to be knowledgeable. So I think in this book that you put together, I love the way you start out by saying Martin, which is an intimacy to begin with, like you say, with letters. I would like to encourage people to write letters too. I mean, with their hand, not with a computer, but with their hand, because it's coming straight out of the mind. I'm sure, Darcy, you do so much writing and put so many words to paper that we need to start.
I'm still a paper gal.
Me too. and pen. Right.
Okay, we have a question
Okay.
from Tammy Jones. There has been a lot of discussion in recent years about the whitewashing of Dr. King. How would you recommend your average person help mitigate this?
Well, there are really lots of great biographies of King, well written. I would recommend, if you have time and patience, to read Taylor Branch's 3 big, giant biographies of King. There are other ones. I know that one of my friends, Jonathan Ike, who is writing a biography of King, there are single volumes that have been written, and all bring a different kind of viewpoint to him. And of course, my a colleague Claiborne Carson really put together King's Word to put together an autobiography of Martin Luther King. So there are lots of ways to read it. I chose this letter form so that people might think of King's message and messages in more contemporary terms. I mean, sometimes he's just seen as a Southern Black man, Baptist minister, but it was much more and a much more deeper thinker. And disagreements with the likes of Malcolm and Stokely, Carmichael, Kwame Ture, but and disagreement with all of the women who felt like, you know, at the March on Washington, there was no woman up there but Mahalia Jackson, really, who had opportunities to speak. So there are all kinds of ways, but nevertheless, one of the things that's striking to me, despite all of the flaws, how much people in Black communities around the country genuinely thought this man had their interests at heart, and they loved him.
I just want to add too that Source Booksellers has this book, Letters to Martin, as their particular offering for Martin Luther King Day, but particularly for African American History Month. So we're going to have it in the store. You can get it online through our online store, and know that this is the one that we have really chosen to be prominent in our collection of books for this time of year.
Well, I'm honored. It looks like there are a couple of questions in the Q&A.
Yep.
Yes.
So how should we spend our MLK Day recognizing the constraints resulting from COVID? You know, this is like the day of service. What would you recommend?
Oh boy, I recommend you mask up, put your gloves on, and go out and still do something. Even having conversations about vaccines in the Black community. We still we still have a struggle with that. Somehow we have to, you know, the young people in Black Lives Matter went out and protested despite COVID, the injustices of and the heinous murder of George Floyd. We too have to join them, and sometimes there's a risk involved in that, but we all should be risking ourselves, or we should join in at least a day-long hunger strike about voting rights. Whatever we can do, we should do.
Yeah, I'm just going to chime in a little bit and say that I believe, you know, communication is so key. And if there's an opportunity to either engage in a dialogue or to learn more, right, so that you have a greater understanding about individuals with whom you don't interact with on a regular basis, I would strongly encourage you to do that. Not just on King Day, by the way.
Mm-hmm. And I think some of our actions may be offering contributions toward, you know, needed projects and programs. I mean, that could just be done at home with a click. So that's if you're more risk averse, or if you just can't get out. In the chat, Hillary Jones says, thank you for this interesting discussion, and Randall for writing the book. As you were talking about King's preaching and writing about love, I thought about the students in Lexington, Kentucky, that's where she is now, who organized to protest the anti-CRT legislation being proposed in the state assembly. I wonder if you have any thoughts about how we as professors might build King into the classroom to address this issue with our students.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so if you are against critical race theory, you're against philosophy, you're against sociology, you're against history, you're against all of it. And of course, we're in an interesting time in the United States. I think we are trying to resemble Brazil, And what I mean by that is that a tiny European minority controls Brazil's politics and government. And if you travel through Brazil, then it is a indigenous people of mixed race and people of African descent who are the majority in Brazil. But there's this minority that leads it. And this is what the United States would like to look like, because there's a great fear that somehow white people, will be displaced. This is why critical race theory is used as a whipping girl, as in the press by these politicians.
So this may not fit, but I mean, I'm certain. I mean, and this is etched in my memory because there were so few professors of African American descent at Calvin. Is there anything instructive in terms of breaking through, right, when you don't have the numbers, or you have a bridal platform that you can share from that experience or beyond?
Well, my experiences as a professor was always to identify with the larger Black community, which was a working class Black community primarily, and to see my struggles at a predominantly white institution with those people in the life of the community. And I had no bones about saying where I identified. That caused me lots of headaches, but in the end, what I've learned about in the battle with my more conservative friends is that straight talk is straight talk, and pushback, and we can't let one of the things that the civil rights movement taught us is we can't let fear dominate us. If I worried about my job, I wouldn't have done that. So you gotta get over the fear and get out there in the fight.
Great.
We have a book in the store by a young man who is a portrait artist. And he went to Princeton on a job. And there he began to paint portraits of the people who work at Princeton. And of course, these were not the professors. These were the people who opened the doors, who cleaned the places, who parked the cars, who did the service work at the school. And it made a huge impression, not only on the people that he made pictures of, painted pictures of, but also on the life and thought of the community itself, because nobody had really thought about, well, there's these people here and they've been here longer than most of us, and their ancestors have been here too, making sure that the school continued on. So I thought about that as you were saying that, Randall, that wherever you are, you can do much more than you think you can. And as a result, that's become sort of a marker for him as an artist.
Uh-oh, we lost Randall.
He's, he's coming back. I know he's coming back. There he is. Yeah, so that the idea of doing what you can where you can and having a sense of doing it with a purpose that's rooted in community is to me a big deal.
It is indeed.
And
Go ahead.
the artist is Mario Moore.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
We didn't talk about the letter, about the content of our character, sort of aligning, I guess, the political with the personal. Can you speak to that? Because certainly that's a challenge. I mean, obviously, again, maybe different era, then as it related to where women were, but that still is a challenge, I would guess, for most. So can you just speak to that a little?
Well, I wanted to speak. I wanted to take that content of our character from the way that my good Republican friends see this as individual and good character, and to talk about content of our character in more intimate sense of relationship. And the first way I wanted to talk about in relationship is Martin Luther King had multiple relationships with women, not love relationships, his mother, his grandmother, sister, his wife. And I wanted to just say that that we have to figure out a way in our personal lives, not to be open, to be honest, and imagine your personal life being invaded by television cameras and being on protest lines and so forth. So I wanted to say that the content of our characters somehow to kind of keep trying to align our best values with uh, an openness to ourselves. Young people are quite different. I'm born a boomer. Everything had to be this way, that way, the other way, and so forth. And King was born in my parents' generation, and that what the Great Depression silent generation, and it was just about struggle and survival. And so I wanted to really explore those relationships because I think that's also democratic. I mean, do we give our partners the right to speak? Do they have a right to say something about lives? And in the old days, it was just men, and so those were all kinds of things. And Ava DuVernay in Selma really touches on this a lot in the conversation between the fictional Martin and Coretta Scott King about his outside relationships. Those are really important, but there were also other things that are important, like fighting that women have equal access to pay and to livelihood and into their own bodies.
Thank you.
From the Q&A, what most surprised you in writing this book?
What most surprised me? That I was it was more about myself, is that I was thinking about these issues in ways that were heartfelt. That I wrote this book out of the heart because I'm worried. I'm in the college classroom all the time. I see young people of all kinds, and I'm worried about that they are so fearful. I grew up in New Orleans. I'm 2 years younger than Ruby Bridges, so that's my New Orleans. And I grew up with a lot of hope, and it was I shouldn't have, but there was. I grew up a lot of hope. I mean, I grew up in a working poor neighborhood, and I worry that the young people needed to have some way of connecting to rebuild hope. Now, I grew up with a lot of institutional support, churches, teachers, other things, but we have to figure out a way to build those structures. And I wanted to say that in a loving way.
Yeah, on that note, I was pleasantly surprised to see that your teachers, that you play his speeches, after he was killed. Like, to me, that's very progressive teacher for the time frame that you were in. So,
well, I mean, this is the interesting thing. I went to a segregated school. I never thought a day about, I hate to say this, white people, because I went to all Black schools with all Black teachers in the South.
yeah.
And they were like, they were demanding that, we lead the race. I was like, what? I told them, like, what? How am I going to, I'm 9 years old, but they cared. And that was very important. The teacher who did that, I had Black male teachers, believe it or not, in 5th and 6th grade. And they demanded that we learn certain things, and gave me a positive role model about being a teacher, because I had my 5th grade was the first Black male teacher, 6th grade, and then through what was then called junior high and high school. So I had a very positive experience about that. And they were, they were, imagine you have to come back to class and teach a group of knuckleheads, boys and girls who
Right.
were kind of goofing off after a major assassination. And this is way he wanted us to learn about this person and pay attention.
Sure.
So, who do you want to write letters to in your next book?
Oh, I'm not going to write letters, but I'm going to write. But I am working on a book about the writer Langston Hughes, because I've been working on a documentary on Langston Hughes, and I want to write a book about Langston Hughes, again with the theme of democracy, because Hughes reminds us that we should have the joy of democratic living, and that's what I want to write a book about. Hughes is the next one. And don't remind me, because my agent is waiting for that proposal.
I can remember hearing Langston Hughes's voice. He was speaking or write a poem or something around a Mingus song. And it's so unique. It's just an amazing sound.
Yeah.
And his story, I can't wait for the book.
Okay, well,
no pressure, Dr. Joe.
No pressure.
I'll get to writing.
We'll keep selling Best of Simple till you get it. Till you finish.
Alrighty.
One thing you've talked about impacting young people, so I thought this was nice, and I shared it with folks because it's an abused term now, the woke term. And so you mentioned that his sermon "Remaining Woke Through a Great Revolution" is sort of the first reference to that, right? And so
Yes.
I just wanted to throw that in there, because I would guess that a lot of people aren't aware of that. So
Yeah, well, 1957 at Morehouse graduation, he says to the student, "You have to remain woke. You can't be like Rip Van Winkle sleeping for 20 years through a revolution. You have to be aware of the global significance of what's going on around you." And I still say that students ought to stay woke.
Since you mentioned Morehouse, would you say a little bit about your book on Benjamin Mays?
Well, yeah, my book on Benjamin Mays, certainly, I kept reading everywhere Mays was mentioned. He had an autobiography. Now, your daughter and I, as historians, are distrustful of autobiographies. We want to know, okay, you telling us what you want us to know. We want to know more. And so I began to do research on Mays. And sometimes when you write a biography, you don't like the person in the end. I actually like this man in the end. And he took over Morehouse when it was almost bankrupt and turned it around, really emphasized the mystique of the Morehouse man, or you can always tell a Morehouse man, but you can't tell him much. And so he turned it around. And because of World War II, he had to keep the doors open. He ingeniously said, "Look, we're going to take really bright youngsters in high school and start them in college early." And there were a bunch of people, including Martin Luther King, who wind up at 15 years old going to Morehouse.
Maynard Jackson was another one.
Yep, Maynard Jackson. There was a bunch of them. I have all met them. They remind me that King wasn't the only one. We were all bright, as they told me.
And they were. Right.
well, I'm going to read another passage just because, if that's okay, unless Dr. Jokes, you want to read another passage.
No, you may.
Okay, all right. So this is right after that. You were saying about the remaining woke through a great revolution, how his words still reverberate. And I just think it's very apt for now, but also to get people to think more holistically about these things. So through our scientific and technological genius, we have made of this world a neighborhood, and yet we have not had the ethical commitment to make of it a brotherhood. We must all learn to live together as brothers. We will all perish together as fools. We are tied together, and most people know that part, right? You know, they know that excerpt. We are tied together in a single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. And whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the way God's universe is made. This is the way it is structured. So I think that's, a very powerful, again, timeless passage. And I hope it's instructive for now as it was then. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for reading that too, because people only take out the few lines and not the beginning of that passage.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know if we have any more questions or
Something in the chat here. Okay, well, and that's it. It sounds like we're at the end here.
yes. Do you want to give any kind of closing remarks about your book or about?
I hope you all out there in the ether of the internet will read this book. I hope I will continue to have conversations with my friends in Detroit. Detroit was so important to the civil rights movement as a whole. King first gave "I Have a Dream" speech in Detroit. It was all Detroiters like to remind us, and the labor movement
Yes.
in Detroit, the Black labor movement. So it is important to remember that history and to build on that history for the future of Detroit, a great city and with a great tradition. And so, and lastly, Motown Records recorded those speeches that I heard in the sixth grade. So Detroit is an important in all the movements around the United States. And I hope the people of Detroit will read my book and share it with friends and family.
One other thing, is it going to be an audio book? Do you have any?
I'm leaving that up to my agent, and
Okay.
yes, we're talking about that. The first thing was to get it published by somebody. So yes,
we have a system called Libro.fm, which is audiobooks that independent booksellers use and direct people to. So it would be really great. Remind them about Libro.fm because that would be a great addition to the print.
We will be on it.
Good.
Well, and I just want to say thanks for allowing me to have this conversation. Thanks to Source. This is great.
Thank you so much, Ms. McConnell and Dr. Jelks. Thank you for being with us and talking about this wonderful book. We're going to be celebrating it in February. We're going to be celebrating it on Monday. We're going to be really, really reading it deeply because it is what I believe Martin Luther King would have wanted to hear. That he was such an intellectual that he would want to know what's going on, and he would want to know where democracy is, what are the pitfalls that we still have. So I just want to remind everybody that the book is available in store at Source Booksellers and online at sourcebooksellersonline.com. We are happy to also take phone calls, right, Mom?
Yes.
If you want to call and order the book, that's fine too.
Phone calls, email, Instagram.
All ways are available.
You can reach us. Come on through.
All the ways.
And the other thing is that this book is going to be a joy to sell. We call it hand selling. When people ask, "What are you reading?" or "Can you recommend?" This is our opportunity to put something like this in the hands of people that they would not have known about necessarily in general conversation. And hopefully there'll be some media heat along with this book as well, because it's very important and very timely and so very readable, and yet talking about subjects of great importance and depth. So thank you, Dr. Jelks, for bringing us into your realm.
Thank
and
you.
helping us move the bookstore in this direction. And that's what we work on, is the practice of responding to the community and offering to the community at the same time.
Thank you. What a Spelman woman.
Thank you, Darcy, for being part of us, and I'm sure
Thank
hope
you.
to see you in the store at any time.
Absolutely. Well, I say I go in there and get lost. That's why I have to discipline myself.
Okay,
I
just to
come
make
out
sure
I come out with a half dozen books. You know?
Okay.
we don't let you spend your lunch money. I always tell people, you gotta keep your lunch money. Don't give that.
All right.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much.
All right.
Thank you all for joining us this evening.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.